Hello, everybody. We're here for the training on the new manual that we've come out with. This is to help you understand how to use the North Carolina teacher evaluation process with early childhood teachers. And some of you may know there is a previous version of this manual. We just recently come out with an updated version. And for a lot of reasons, one of which is, the system's been in use now, the new performance evaluation system. It's not that new anymore for almost 10 years or maybe a little over 10 years now. And so we have a lot of very experienced users now, and we have a lot of very experienced users on our staff. And so we decided to take a really careful look at revisiting the original manual to see if we got it right, basically. Did we align all of the different kinds of things you see in real classrooms with the different particular levels on the rubric as they should be? We also took a very critical eye towards whether we left any kind of interesting and particularly exemplar evidences out of our earlier manual. We have received a lot of input from a lot of really talented staff that we have, and people who have been using the performance evaluation system for quite a long time now with birth to kindergarten teachers. Also, the process itself has evolved, and so we've updated some things, and some of the resources that we point people to have been updated as well. So hopefully you'll find this all very interesting and helpful as a way to get an overview to the manual. Now, what we're not going to be able to do in this short period of time today is train you on how to be an evaluator completely, right? We have other trainings for mentors and evaluators. This is really to introduce you to the resource manual as a way of understanding what, this additional resource is available to you. So, anything else to add, Bonnie?
I just want to plug in the notion that this really came about because of the survey of the principals and administrators, particularly those who did not have any knowledge of early education or young children, and they asked for it. They said, we don't really know the characteristics or the developmental appropriateness of activities and instruction of young children. So that survey plus the feedback we had from them, the last time Rich and I did the training was in the 1st of August and the last of July, and all we had was principals. And it was really interesting to not only get that recent feedback, because we got that first feedback in 2007, and so This was last month or this month. And it was the fact that they still don't know the characteristics of young children in their schools, and they readily admit it. So they were really, really pleased to have this manual. They really saw it as helpful. In fact, they took several copies. Whenever Eva Phillips was where we were, she had several boxes of them, and so they would ask for 2 copies or 3 copies. So they were taking them somewhere to share with others.
Share with their, I think all the principals took copies for their assistant principals, and distributed the PDF version to all their kindergarten teachers and their pre-K teachers. So I guess I started what you said reminded me that I started a little bit forward in the history of all this. The other big reason we have this manual in the first place, and the reason why we did the first version of it, is because the teacher performance evaluation process for North Carolina licensed teachers is designed intentionally to be very generic, right? It's something that can be applied to a pre-K teacher and a high school physics teacher, or a middle school math teacher, or a music teacher in middle school, or whatever it might be. So while the standards and while the large dimensions of the measure really do cover the broad kind of constructs or big aspects of quality teaching, the indicators are not specific enough in the rubric to indicate what would you see, say, in a classroom for 4-year-olds or in a kindergarten classroom. So the original motivation for doing the manual in the first place was somewhat of a translation exercise to look at what resources would those who evaluate and mentor teachers of young children need in order to understand how to apply the intentionally generic rubric to this very specific group of teachers. And so in our recent work with the school system in Winston-Salem, all those reasons were really confirmed. I mean, in the group of principals we had, we spoke to all their elementary principals. We had people who had elementary or early childhood background themselves, and kind of understood some of the unique qualities that you would see in an early childhood classroom, all the way up to people who had never taught elementary school themselves before and needed any resource they could get to understand what does a high-quality classroom for 4-year-olds look like, or for 5-year-olds. Okay,
So let's show the next slide and show the kind of the agenda. Well,
so we first want to give acknowledgement to the different organizations that supported this work, both the original manual and this revision. And so this work really is a collaboration of a lot of different agencies. McREL, of course, is the organization that developed the teacher performance evaluation rubric for North Carolina, so we need to acknowledge them. But also this work has been supported by the North Carolina State Board of Education, the Professional Teaching Standards Commission, and also the Office of Early Learning. And then within the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, the Early Educator Support Licensure and Professional Development Unit is our current sponsor for the work that we're doing currently. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is show you that the manual itself is available as a PDF. I like to carry it around on my tablet when I go to classrooms. You can have it on your phone. I have it on my phone and on my tablet. So it's very convenient to use as you're talking with a teacher, as you're observing a teacher. But those of you that are here face-to-face in the training have paper copies, and you can also order paper copies if you're interested. But I just wanted to show you that the manual itself is available as a PDF. You can download it from our center's website, and we'll give you that link at the end of the training. And it's very convenient to have it as a PDF because, like I said, that works with an iPad, for example, or a smartphone. Here you can see the manual as a PDF, and we won't go through any particular components of it now, but we will be referring to different particular pages as we go through the training. So if you have a paper copy here in the face-to-face version of the training, you can flip through that. If you want to, you can also go ahead and download the PDF and have it ready so that we can take you to particular pages as we need to. But you can see it's very, very easy to use, just kind of page through the PDF very easily. Okay, so let me give you what our agenda is for today, the things we're going to try to cover. We're going to go over in a little bit more detail than we already have what the purpose of the manual is. We also want to go over some core beliefs about early childhood education because our experience has been that, of course, a large percentage of the people that do performance evaluations for teachers of young children are principals of elementary schools, and they may or may not have had a background in early childhood education themselves. So we want to give a little bit of an overview of some of the core beliefs that are behind high-quality teaching in early childhood settings, because that really does set the tone for how you look for quality practices. We're going to give you an overview of specific sections of the manual just to introduce you to what resources are available. We're going to give an overview of the key components of the North Carolina teacher evaluation process, and we're also going to go through some sample evidences for some of the specific elements in the rubric.
Let me talk a little bit about the purpose of the manual. You're all familiar with this book, the teacher evaluation process, which is current and used with all of our pre-K through the 12th grade. So the reason this manual was actually created so we could see how this process gets translated into high-quality teaching in early education. And that is really up on the board. I didn't realize it was there. It also can promote the professional development. What we've discovered in the last year is teachers are using this manual to help them in their careers. We're hearing different words now from our pre-K teachers. We're hearing career development, we're hearing professional development, we're hearing that they'd like to have some input on this, input on that. So we're picking up a lot of information about the needs of our pre-K teachers with this process. And then look at the resources that are there in the public and non-public settings. One of the things when I do this with groups of strangers, and I know y'all all so well, I can call you by your little old names, but I always tell them in the teacher evaluation process book to turn to page 1. I don't want you to forget this book because this is tied really into the manual. We couldn't have had the manual if we didn't have the book. But one of the things it says is the mission of the North Carolina State Board of Education is that every public school student will graduate from high school globally competent for work and post-secondary education and prepared for life in the 21st century. When I first read this, I thought, oh my goodness, we pre-K people have really got to get on the ball. This means that really schooling has a new version. People are expecting different things than they ever thought before. We're getting feedback different. Now that I have a 4-year-old great-grandson, I'm now going to pre-K meetings, and the kinds of things that they're talking about are way different than when I taught 4-year-olds. They're talking about all kinds of discoveries. They're talking about things that you can imagine. It's like they've already had 10 or 12 years of experience, and they've got all kinds of neat things that they're ready to do. I went to Lucas's pre-kindergarten family meeting the other night, and sure enough, in the classroom, I told him things that I'd seen because he wasn't there. He said, oh, I had that last year. I said, well, they had a Lego table. We had that last year. I said, well, sauce and blocks, we had those last year. And I thought, man, they got a real challenge coming here with the 4s who's been in the 3-year-old program. Because everything I told him that I saw in his room, he said, we had that last year. so that they're really on the ball. But don't know that the point I really want to make is that last point. We want these procedures to be in public and non-public settings. We don't want this just for North Carolina pre-K. We want it for like where Lucas is with the church pre-K. We want them to have a setting. So I've taken this book to the director of the pre-K program at Lucas's church and gave her this copy this week of this, and she is glad to get it. So do know that it's a public and private endeavor, and we don't see one trying to outdo the other.
Sounds good, yeah. So just to recap, the overall purpose was to translate the indicators of high quality teaching from the rubric into specific evidences that you could look for in early childhood classrooms, because in a lot of ways they are different from other classrooms. Certainly what happens in a classroom for 3s or 4s or 5s is different from what might even be seen as quality practices in 1st or 2nd grade. So the other thing we wanted to do was we wanted to make it clear that we wanted to make it easier to apply the North Carolina teacher evaluation process in early childhood settings. As Bobby was saying, we want to make sure that the field knows that we're offering resources to the entire early childhood community that are really useful across settings, right? This can be used in public and non-public settings, as Bobby mentioned, but across grade levels for pre-K classrooms and kindergarten classrooms, and it can be used by people who play different roles in the educational system. Mainly administrators and principals are, of course, the people that do a lot of the performance evaluations for licensed teachers in our state, but it's also going to be helpful to teachers, mentors, evaluators, coaches, facilitators, et cetera.
Yeah, one of the things I think this is a new tool for mentors and evaluators. And so one of the things we need to do is actually make that available to them and talk about how this becomes a really resource for them. So this is, the more I look at this, the more I know this is a good manual. And the more I know that it's going to be really helpful and help us get into a dimension we can all agree on, that's quality. You know, we've talked about quality forever. I remember I used to have my students list 5 things about quality. There are a lot more things than that, but I do remember that was one of the things that NEAR, the national, whatever that stands for, y'all all know that. So do know that it is really important that we know what the national and the standards are. I learned that from Cindy Wheeler. That you really need to keep up with what are the national standards. And North Carolina in pre-K has always been one of the 6 states that met all the criteria and met those on a
standards.
A continuing basis.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, fortunately for us, who have been sounding the alarm, so to speak, about early childhood education for many years, society is catching up to where we've been all along, right? And beginning to understand that there's a great value to having high quality practices in the early years, and that you don't get back those early years of development when so much is going on with the development of children. You don't get it back both from a physiological standpoint and you don't get it back from a sort of a social or emotional standpoint either, in the sense that these are the years when children learn what the social role of student is. They learn about what Bobby and I have been talking about, the 3 C's, sort of curiosity, confidence, and control. And what we mean by that, curiosity, of course, is this is the time to ensure that there's high quality teaching going on so the children learn that idea about being lifelong learners, right? They learn that it's fun to be curious, it's fun to learn how to be a curious lifelong learner. If you can build that in children very young, and we can use resources like this to help teachers improve their practice, and they can build that sense of curiosity and optimism about learning into children when they're young, that goes a long way for solving a lot of other kind of social issues that we talk about, and educational achievement issues as well. The second C, being confidence, is, when social emotional things are going well in the classroom, as we'll see as we look more into the rubric, when the classroom, a high quality classroom, has a really positive, accepting, inclusive, responsive, and warm and accepting environment for children, they really learn a sense of confidence. They gain a sense of self-confidence, they gain a sense of the idea that I can do this, I can play the social role of student and be successful. And then the third C, control, is a little bit misnamed, but it's just, keeping with the alliteration. But we're really talking about self-regulation, right?
Yeah.
This is, for many children, the early childhood experience is the first out-of-home care or out-of-home setting that they experience. And so again, there's the idea of how do they learn how to play successfully the social role of member of a group. And that involves learning good self-regulation strategies. So we know that the rubric and the resources we prepared to support the use of the rubric help teachers improve the quality of their practice, and in doing so, help them build the most important things into young children that we know they need to be successful as
students. If y'all have been looking at Frank Porter Graham's emails and things they send out, for the last couple of weeks, they sent out all kinds of things about the value of pre-K and about the things that they're discovering in the 3rd grade. This week there was something about the 6th grade. So they're following up those children who have had quality, and they do say high quality experiences, and seeing that they really make a significant difference in those 3 things that Rich talked about, or even in the academic components that they're looking at. So there is a shift from parents and the community for high quality preschool. They're not going to tolerate anything else. And some of the people who have just been having programs that were just sort of happen chance, they're discovering that they're not getting the enrollment that they had before. So there really is a real shift that's occurring.
So the idea is that society and parents in particular are expecting a lot more from early childhood education, and that means that the quality improvement needs to be there, and we think that this making the performance evaluation process a real dynamic and meaningful one for teachers is a way to improve the quality of their practice, which then strengthens the connection between quality early childhood practices and experiences for children with later school success. So here's an overview of the manual. There's a section that just gives them an introduction to the purpose of the manual, a lot of the things we're talking about now. Section 2 has an overview of the evaluation process. We know some of you may be very familiar with the evaluation process itself, and some of you may be new to performance evaluation. Section 3 talks about key principles of early childhood education. And as we said before, we think it's very important for anyone who's going to evaluate the quality of an early childhood teacher's professional work that they have some basic grounding in not just what is quality teaching in general, or what are the big constructs of teaching quality that we look for according to the professional teaching standards in our state, but they also understand some of the unique features of quality in early childhood education. Section 4 is about resources for mentors and evaluators. We have a lot of links there and other readings that we suggest for people. Section 5 is tips for evaluators. There really is an art to becoming a good evaluator and making this experience a participatory and interactive one for the teacher and a meaningful one for the teacher. And so there is, a good principal isn't necessarily a good evaluator, a good teacher isn't necessarily a good evaluator. There's some unique skills that need to be learned and practiced, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. Section 6 gives samples to help illustrate the standards. What we've actually done is gone through the rubric, and for every standard and every element within every standard, we've created sample evidences, sample things you would see either in the children, in the structure of the classroom, or in the practice of the teacher, and hopefully those help illustrate what each one of the elements means. And then section 7 is the appendix or glossary.
Yeah, and I want to point out that the resources are up to date because Jessica brought them all up to date this year. And so one of the things that's happened to the manual, when we say this is a revision, it really is. It's updated. The links are new. The links are current, rather, not necessarily new, current. The resources are current, and so they've all been thoroughly checked. So it's not something that's a hungover. It's really been brought up to date. So it's important to remember that. That's what we hope we'll always be able to do, is keep this manual up to date. We can refocus it if we have to in the things that we learn, but it should be a working document. It should be something that's constantly getting in new information, and we're dealing with it.
So we want to step back a second and give a little bit of an overview of pre-K programs in North Carolina. As Bobby pointed out before, we've had times in not such distant past, where North Carolina really led the nation in a lot of very tangible ways in terms of policy about programs for young children. So Bobby, why don't you give a little bit of overview of some of the history of what brought us to this point?
Yeah, More at 4 started in 2001 with the Department of Public Instruction. Most of you were born then. But you got to know that More at 4 was really seen as a real challenge in this state. We had to work like the dickens to get More at 4. I remember riding to Raleigh over and over again, discussing with Craig Phillips and a variety of people the importance of focusing on pre-K children. So the thing that we thought we could sell it to the state was if we talked about it in public and in community childcare settings, so that it didn't look to lead that. Like we had the private people who were worried that we were going to put them out of business with 4-year-olds. And then we had the 5-year-olds saying, oh, we don't even know what to do with 4s. So we really came at it that way. It was going to be a private-public partnership, and that we saw it that way in continuing through the years. It's really what it has continued. For the last couple of years, I've actually evaluated teachers who were in private settings who had BK licenses and who met those standards and those requirements. The first pre-KK TPAI, that was Teacher Performance Appraisal Instrument. I don't know if y'all remember that, but that was a direct reflection of the K-12 Teacher Performance Appraisal Instrument. And the first teacher cohort that started in May 2007 were actually under that kind of evaluation. I remember going in with the pre-K TPAI and evaluating teachers and giving feedback to the teachers that way.
Any of you evaluate teachers using the TPAI?
Did you? No, you were probably evaluated
Or
with it.
were any of you evaluated using the TPAI?
Yeah, you were probably evaluated with it.
So you probably remember it was a series of discrete items, and you made a judgment essentially about the extent to which a teacher was at standard or not on that behavior, right? So you were supposed to go in and look for all of those key marker behaviors in every visit, and the TPAI did a really good job of sorting out those teachers who were very much below standard from everyone else, right? And so it was a good strategy for documenting rationale for maybe taking particular action against a teacher that was very much below standard or poor in their performance. But what it did not do a good job of is lay out a career trajectory for ongoing growth for teachers. And so in a lot of ways, we think the teacher evaluation process that we have now is an improvement over somewhat more of a at standard, not at standard checklist kind of approach like we had with the TPAI. So then another milestone in all this history is in 2007, the Division of Child Development and Early Education within North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services took on the NC
Can't do
Pre-K
that.
program. Essentially, More at 4 was moved out of the Department of Public Instruction and had a name change and a little bit of restructuring and became a part of the child care licensing kind of arm of the state government. So this was good and bad, right? In some ways, moving out of the Department of Public Instruction was like deprofessionalizing us in one sense, in that we were decoupled from the rest of the professional teaching corps. But in the other sense, I think there were some really good developments that came about. For example, the Early Educator Support Licensure and Professional Development Agency was born, and that's who funds all of our activity. And we were approved then, subsequently through that agency, to serve as an additional LEA for all of those North Carolina teachers who work in non-public settings but hold the birth to kindergarten license. Because one of the things that continues to be an ongoing challenge for those teachers is meeting the standards for ongoing performance evaluation and ongoing mentoring and ongoing professional development. When you teach in a public school setting, you have a lot of supports as a licensed teacher for all of those activities through your district. Teachers that work in non-public settings but hold the BK license have a little bit more of a challenge. So one of the things that our group does through our center is provide a lot of supports to that
Right.
subgroup of teachers.
Yeah. One of the things I remember, we were in a real kind of dilemma when they moved us in a Department of Public Instruction. Turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to us, because they put us in the Division of Child Development and Early Education. And that gave us a chance to really focus on public and private partnerships and those kinds of things. So the fact that now we serve as an LEA for all North Carolina teachers who work in non-public settings and for the BK license. So know that there's been this constant movement toward assuring quality, making sure that the standards are there, making sure that you've got the resources that you need to establish those standards. Did you do the next slide?
I
Where
did,
it's
yeah.
got the North Carolina demonstration classroom projects. I don't know if any of you were part of that. Somehow I think Melinda might have been when they began to have those demonstration classroom projects. Yeah, she's shaking her head. They still have the demonstration classrooms. Then they developed the early education let's see, was they support licensure and professional development regional hubs in 2014 at East Carolina and at UNC Charlotte. And the whole EESLPD currently offers professional development to teachers across the state. So what we've really got is a marvelous thing, if you've been here as long as me, to see the public and the private striving for the same kind of quality. And in a partnership, not in a battle, not in a fight, but in what they.
Plenty of children with needs to be served, and there's not enough resources to go around for all of them, so we don't have to feel like we're competing with each other. Okay, so we want to do a quick exercise. I want you to take a minute and discuss with those that you're going through the training with, either remotely or here, what effective performance evaluation feedback to early childhood teachers would include. And after you've had a chance to discuss a little bit, we'll take some comments.
Yeah. What would an early childhood teacher need to hear? I don't know how they can.
So if you're remote, you can send some comments through the question function in the chat box, or we can just have a conversation here. So
Yeah.
anybody have any ideas about, what do teachers expect from their performance evaluation feedback, and what should high quality feedback include?
I think it always needs to be delivered in an encouraging way, so always taking into account that growth mindset versus
Right.
how you were talking about with the last instrument. It may have felt a little bit differently.
Right, we have to form relationships, form partnerships with teachers, encourage them to participate in the process, and give them feedback that feels accessible and useful to them. Absolutely.
Give specific examples
That's a great point.
of what was seen, what was observed, and potentially talk about some things to improve as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the things that we've tried to do with this manual is, although we couldn't be comprehensive and give all the possible indicators that you could you could see for quality in an early childhood classroom. We've tried to give enough examples so that it provides some real meat and specificity, and I think that's a great comment about being specific enough to be actionable, to lead to improvement. Well, what we want to go over next then, building on that conversation, is what we're calling key assumptions. These are principles of providing high quality and useful and meaningful feedback to teachers. So the first point is, and some of these I may read because we've been very careful about the wording of these because I think these are really important principles. Effective teacher performance evaluation facilitates communication of the standards and elements in the North Carolina teacher evaluation process in a way that is meaningful and relevant to early childhood teachers. So again, just as one of our participants was saying, we want the feedback to be specific enough that it leads to meaningful and relevant applications. The next assumption is effective performance evaluation provides useful and practical suggestions for improvement to early childhood teaching practices. Kind of another version of the same principle. Effective performance evaluation leads to targeted professional development goals based on observational data. So we believe that when the system is used well, it can lead to a teacher understanding their strengths and their areas for improvement in a much cleaner and richer way, and that can help them and encourage them to set individualized professional development goals that are really grounded in actual observational data, things that came from their own teaching practices in their own classrooms.
Think about what's on these slides, because the emphasis here with these three statements is really on career development. One of the things we discovered in the last 10 years is that our teachers really want to be professional and that they want to be on a career path. So these performance evaluation facilitates that. It helps you set goals. It helps you determine, if you remember those forms where you set the long-term goals and the time frame and all those kinds of things. It means that you're looking at not only the standards and the standards for your specialty, but you're looking at how you deliver the instruction, how it is that you are as a teacher. For the pre-K teacher, sometimes it's quite different than it is for the fifth grade teacher. But it's really interesting when you start looking at the North Carolina TEP and you start looking at our assumptions and stuff and see when you begin to think where you are in your background. One of the things that makes us uniquely different is our focus is child development. Our really curriculum is child development. And so therefore, that's where we base our knowledge base begins there. What is the child like? Where is the child developmentally? How do you make decisions about that? So that gets to be very, very important in assumption. The other thing that's listed on this slide is that teachers can reflect about their practice. I remember in one of my classes, I used to have a form, and it was kind of in a circle, and I can't remember what I tried to get out of it, but it never got what I wanted. But it gave you a chance to reflect on decisions you had made. And my students had a terrible time with that. One of the things that our assumption underlying this is that you can learn to be reflective. Right. You can really learn to take a look at what you're doing and why you did it and how you might improve or how you might change and that kind of thing.
We all feel very passionately committed to the idea that all children can learn, but we also know, especially working with young children, that children have to learn how to learn, right?
Yeah,
well, in a lot of ways, it's the same thing with working with new teachers, right? Just like we expect part of our role in working with the youngest children who are just beginning to have the school experience, part of our role is to help them learn how to be learners. Well, in a lot of ways, our work with brand new teachers is about teaching them how to be reflective about professional practice. And I just want to take a second to read the second point too. High quality teachers consistently reflect on both the professional teaching standards and the student learning standards for their specialty and how they relate to the actual instructional practices in their classrooms. So we think that a teacher that really knows how to reflect is someone who understands the expectations for them as a professional, understands what high-quality teaching is, and also understands the goals and objectives for student learning and growth and development that they have when working with the students. But we also know that we have to help them learn how to be reflective. And coming in and being an objective set of eyes, looking at what's going on in the classroom and then providing meaningful and relevant feedback is one way that we walk teachers through the process of learning to reflect about their professional practice.
One of the things I learned in observing teachers is that when I was there and I was sitting over there just taking notes about what I was seeing, I saw entirely different things than they actually saw. And so, and I would say, did you see so-and-so and so? No, I didn't even know that was happening. So that became really part of the post-conference where they turned out to be so valuable, where you really looked at the kinds of things you'd observed and you talked about their goals and their intentions and the kinds of things that were happening there. I don't think anything will take the place of actually having an objective observer. I've tried to think about that. Now, at UNC Greensboro years ago, I worked in a classroom that was to really be observed. In other words, people would come in. It's back when they started Head Start, and they would come in and sit around my room and take notes and observe and stuff like that. And I used to think, wouldn't it be great if you had like a video and you could go somewhere in the room and step on something, turn it on, and video some stuff, and then when you needed to, turn it off. And I tried that with the UNC Greensboro and asked them to put that in Curry, which was where I had that demonstration classroom. They would not buy that. They said, no, Bobby, we won't do that. But I still think that's a good idea, that you could have some videos to look at. But I do go now places where there are video clips of things that are happening in their classroom, which really is, and occasionally I would take on my phone a little video and we'd look at it. So
sure.
That becomes a great tool.
Right. Go through the next slide a little bit here. Effective performance evaluation feedback helps teachers understand how to facilitate and enhance child development and learning. So we have to remember the ultimate goal of course, everything we do is enhancing and supporting child growth and development. But our feedback should be oriented towards helping teachers understand the effect that they have on children's growth and development. All teachers can take responsibility for their own professional growth and development and show leadership in the evaluation process by presenting artifacts and evidences of their teaching successes. This is a really important point to make. Another thing we have to teach teachers how to do is how to look for high-quality artifacts that really illustrate the good things that are going on in their classroom. We know that no matter how much time we spend with a teacher, how well we do implement this process, it's still a handful of snapshots of what goes on in the classroom.
Right.
And so we can't possibly pretend that what we see in short snapshots completely captures everything that's going on in that classroom. But we do know that we can help teachers understand how to collect high-quality artifacts that illustrate the successes of what they're doing with children. We also know that this system is designed as a professional development, career-long process of growth for teachers, and part of that is them getting very involved with the process themselves and showing leadership by not just letting us rely only on things that we see during our snapshots, but providing us with artifacts that they collect on an ongoing basis so we can get a richer and fuller picture of what happens in that classroom. And lastly, principals and administrators are really seeking help in understanding what a high-quality early childhood classroom looks like. And we feel like our group, we're uniquely positioned to help administrators and other administrative professionals understand what quality looks like in the early childhood classroom.
You know, that was so obvious when we did that training in Winston-Salem, because we had like 6 groups of principals, and they really, it was like they could not get enough stuff. They had were so interested. I thought that was a positive thing, because instead of just wiping them off in their head and saying, well, I don't know anything about those young kids, I won't even look down the hall, they were really asking questions and interested.
And they really were interested in making the process fair to all teachers,
Right.
whether the teachers are teaching in a tested grade or not, whether they're teaching in a grade that's getting a lot of attention or not, whether they're in the more traditional looking classrooms in the later grades or whether they're in the earliest experiences for children. Okay, so we want to shift gears now and talk about some foundational principles of what
And look and
makes
see if
early
you've got the
childhood
manual, see if it's on page 17 in the manual that you've got, 17 or 8. I've written a note here in my notes, so it might be in there, the key principles, is it? Yeah, okay, all right, excuse me, Rich.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
So the first one is early childhood is a unique time of life that warrants respect in its own right. There's a lot that my
Overstatement.
friend Bobby Rowland can say about that, I'm sure.
This is the most understated thing we've said. It is the unique time of life that warrants respect in its own right. I remember I had Jimmy Himes. I'm sorry y'all aren't older, but if you went back into the archives, you look up a book called Teaching the Child Under 6 by James Himes, and he was one of my teachers at Vanderbilt. And so look that book up. And he made it so clear that early childhood, and he was talking about 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s, he says, this is absolutely the time to focus on 3s, 4s, 5s, and 6s, not what they're going to be like when they're 8, not whatever they're supposed to do in the first grade. You're supposed to, and it warrants a focus. If I'm 4, you need to focus on when I'm 4 and not worry about when I'm going to, what the first grade teacher is going to think of you. And he's also the one that talked about early education needs to take into account the whole child. Who does a good job of that is Foundations, which is down there at my feet now. But it's the domains that you're really looking at. We used to have a lot of trouble having people look at social emotional development. We didn't have any trouble for them to look at physical development because that was so obvious. And then anything that they could call academic, even if it wasn't, like counting or saying letters or something like that. But do know that you've got to start thinking about physical, mental, social, emotional, temperament, all kinds of aspects of development. And then that's why we stuck that in there, key principles. I don't think we wrote these. I think we copied these out of NAEYC. Play is integral. Play is essential. That's how they learn. That's how they take things apart and put them back together. It is so interesting to watch children play with ideas rather than recite ideas. And then children are individuals. So that on this one slide, it reflects early childhood culture. It reflects beliefs. It actually reflects the research findings. I wrote in my book, Piaget, Kohlberg, Vygotsky, Erickson, all of those theoretical perspectives. I'm hoping that the child and family development people who've taken a major in that realize the importance of that theoretical developmental perspective, because it really does add you a whole dimension of understanding of what the young children are like, and then how you apply. So in that manual, there are those lessons. And then the next slide talks about the foundations where learning builds. This is about relationships. I don't know when's the last time you were in a class of 4s, but you haven't been lately, go. Because what you're really watching, see, I've gotten all kinds of exposure this year. You see them make friends. You see how, I see Lucas go up to somebody and he'll look at them like he really wants to interact with them. He might say, hey, and then somebody might say, hey, back. If they don't, he pushes them. So he gets their attention that way, and he pushes, and then he, kind of does like that. But they want to touch each other. They want to talk to one another. They want to sometimes build side by side. If Patrick wasn't here, I'd tell this story. I'm going to tell it anyway. When Patrick was in preschool, they told us that he was biting. Well, his mother said he didn't bite. So I said, well, I'll just come to the school and see. So I went in the school and I sat down, and Patrick did bite. Does he look astounded? Patrick's in the room. Anyway, what he did is that when he was over in blocks with this one little boy, this little boy would get behind him and push him. And then Patrick turned around and bite him. So I said, yes, Patrick does bite. So how do you want to stop this? I said, don't let Patrick and that little boy in the blocks together for a while until they can go in there together. And when they do go in there together, you go with them. Patrick never bit again. It was that simple. So he really wasn't a biter. He was just a fighter and ready to fight back.
He was communicating, right?
Yes, he was
That how
communicating. He was
making
telling
his
that boy to
point.
move.
Yeah.
But you know, that is so important to know the source of those things. When I go to observe and I've seen some little disarray or disagreement or something, instead of me telling that teacher what it is you should have done, I always ask, what do you do when something like this happens? So that teacher can begin to reflect on what they're doing and all like that. But, now we've got so many languages and so many cultures in the classroom. It's amazing. I really don't know how the teachers actually can understand all of this and work with them in the way they do.
Heroic work that they're doing.
Huh?
They're in a very high-stress profession, and they do a great job for society, and
Yeah.
they're underappreciated for doing it. And the things that make teaching a stressful profession are very constant. They're the same things that happen all around the world and that happened 200 years ago, except this one thing. And this one thing is the signature difference in the classroom of today. If you want to see what America will look like 20 years from now, go visit a classroom of young children, right? Because we can see that how many different languages are spoken in the homes, the cultural differences, and the differences in sort of expectations of schooling that come from all the different backgrounds that all the children are coming from. There's a new immigrant arriving in the United States every 33 seconds. You can go to the Census Bureau website and see that. You can also see on the Census Bureau's website that European American children among the young children under school age in America are just barely above 50% of the population. So very soon, in the population of young children in our country, children from European American backgrounds will be in the minority, and that's the way the society itself will look 20 years from now, and that's the way the electorate will be. So teachers of young children are facing substantial challenges when it comes to language acquisition, cultural diversity, and so on, but they're also presented with tremendous opportunities, to use that diversity for real wonderful teachable moments and enriching the experiences of young children.
You know, a couple years ago, maybe the year before last, in McAdenville, North Carolina, which is just a little townie between Gastonia and Charlotte, in one classroom in McAdenville, of the 4-year-olds, there were children from 7 different countries of origin. 7, and there were like 15 or 18 in the class. I guess there weren't. But that to me was, and I guess they had come there because of the kinds of jobs or something, but I just thought that was the most amazing thing to see, because they all had a different family background, a different culture, different languages at home. It was amazing that she had 8 children like that in that class. And she and I talked about that. She said, oh, what she had done is she just let them talk to each other in any kind of language, and that she was learning all kinds of things. But mainly what she did is take a real step aside and just let them interact and find their own ways to come together and stuff. Which that was someplace we should have videoed. I kept thinking, we need a video of this so that people can see the world.
And of course, here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, there's over 70 languages spoken in the homes of the children that are coming to the classroom. So
Makes me think of the generational impact that will have, that we will start to see year after year after
Yeah.
year, about just the way that we come together. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it starts
Yeah, and
so early in those classrooms.
the value of having an inclusive and an accepting environment for young children, then how young children learn to get along with people from all kinds of diverse backgrounds, and how that can have an influence on shaping society to be a more inclusive place. Let's go to the next point, Bobby. Do you want to talk about families or?
The families, yeah, the families, first teachers, important partners. We can't overplay that. We can't overdo that. That gets very hard with the families with the kind of schedules they have now, where maybe they're kinds of dual jobs and those kinds of things. There should be all kinds of ways to work that out. When I worked with the 4-year-olds in Gaston County, and most of the parents that were in the 4-year-olds that I worked with worked. So I would meet them sometime, and they worked like on a third shift. And I would meet them for breakfast. And we would just sit down at McDonald's and have whatever you got it, a biscuit or something. And we would then have a discussion. And that's really how I got to meet the parents. Otherwise, I would have never seen any of the fathers, and I would not have seen many of the mothers. And so we found that worked for us. And I remember going to McDonald's in Belmont to sit down and eat with parents and talk about what their child was doing and how things were going and all that kind of stuff. So know that it's really true that there's the major teacher they'll have all their life, and there's certainly partners in the education. You have to treat them like a partner. You don't tell them everything that you have to do. You need to have those parent conferences. You need to sit down with them and talk about what's important in their life, what they want. I love what they said at Lucas's school. What is it you expect of this school? They asked that. I love that. And what is you hoping that Lucas will do here? Instead of saying, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And they were very open-minded. That happened to be their director now, is a UNC graduate, so she learned good here, yeah. And then that early childhood educators are decision makers. Why I wrote page 20 in my manual, I don't know. Why did I write that? What is it? Is that where that says that?
That's where that statement is, yes.
It's on my my notebook. But do know that more and more, they're beginning to trust the pre-K teacher with having knowledge of education and what's appropriate for young children. So, but I've used always this, be an advocate for your field and go out there and insist, join something. If there's something going on, you haven't been invited, go. And so you get in your 2 cents worth. Because otherwise, they might forget who we are. And so you really have to advocate for yourself.
Okay, so what we want to do now with all that background information is shift gears a little bit. We want to talk about the process itself and give an overview of the process. So if you could, go to page 10 in your manual.
Page 10, section 2. What we've written here are all the notions about the pre-K program and who it's operated like. The North Carolina Division of Child Development Early Education, and it also talks about requirements for pre-K teachers in non-public settings. And it also talks about the LEAs across the state, including us, the EESLPD unit. And we have to provide, by law, a system of support that has mentoring, formal observations, and summary evaluation. Know that if you look on the next page where it talks about it's the mentoring, coaching, and evaluation process, and all to get started. This was put in here so that the principals, the administrators, they would have a notion about what's expected in an evaluation process. That's why this section was added, showing that in non-public settings, the administrators of daycare settings, what would be expected of those. Mm-hmm. If you look on page 12 and 13, it talks about the process, how you get started, when a teacher is eligible to be mentored and evaluated, and then also the phases of the process, like the self-assessment. If you did anybody this year, they have to come up with a PDP plan, then the formal observations. I think, is this up to date, Jessica? Is it still 4 thoughts, 4 observations?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, this should be up to date. I'm hoping it is. And then the summary evaluation conference, which scores the whole summary rating for, and then the end of the year submission. So this is done every year. The data is entered into NCEES home base, and that means we've got some data. That means if any of us wanted to make a step in finding out really what's going on, we should investigate that. I think that's something UNC Charlotte ought to do.
Well, we're going to
I
start that
really
as
do.
early as tomorrow.
That's right.
Yeah, I really do. I think we ought to write, I think we need to pull all that together and write a paper, because we have got a story to tell that is very uniquely different.
Right.
Right.
We're one of the few states that mentors, evaluates, observes, feedbacks. I mean, we know
And we
other
document the
states-
improvement in quality over time.
Say that again.
We document the improvement in quality over time
Yes,
because
yes.
all of that data is
Yeah.
being collected.
Yeah.
One of the important things we want you to gain from a quick overview of this section of the manual is that there are many components to this evaluation process, and all of them have important purposes associated with them. Principals in elementary schools are very busy people, are responsible for all kinds of things, but they also have the advantage of seeing the teacher on an ongoing basis every day and having a general awareness of what goes on in a particular classroom. For us in our program as external evaluators, we have the time to do every step in the process very completely and fully, so we have that advantage, but we don't have the advantage of seeing the teacher on an ongoing everyday basis. So every one of these components really plays an important part, and it's important to do all of them and to do all of them well. It's the way we build rapport with the teachers and build credibility with the teachers, and each one of the components plays a unique role in the type of opportunities for feedback that it gives teachers. So for example, don't skip the pre-conferences. It's tempting for a teacher in a school that sees their principal every day to maybe not to have as an extensive a pre-conference. That teacher sees that classroom every day, or that principal sees that classroom every day. We don't. We need the pre-conferences to understand what is different potentially about the environment since the last time we've been there. There may be some new children, there may be some new features, new challenges, and so forth. So every one of the components plays an important role. This training is not designed to train you to go through all of those, but we wanted you to be exposed to the fact that this section of the manual outlines all of those different components.
If you look on 15 in this manual, you'll see the initial license, which they used to call SP2, and then the continuing license, and show that those that need and everybody has to have an individual growth plan, unless there has been some concerns, some question about some of the activities that are looked at. What makes this different than things in the other states is this really puts the professional growth focus on the teacher. And the teacher is the one who keeps this rolling and going. So it doesn't mean that it's not looked at, observed, evaluated, but it does mean that the self-assessment and the notion about where it's going, it comes from the individual teacher. So it's a case where the teacher is setting the limits or the parameters is a word I should use, yeah.
And Bobby, if I can interject really quickly, because I know
Sure.
that other partners and other leaders in the field will be watching this.
Yeah,
It's important to point out that that is a sample only of the evaluation schedule, because that is updated on an annual basis.
okay.
So the dates and the number of observations that may be
Very
listed
good.
are
Yeah.
it's just an example.
Yeah,
Right.
good point, good.
Very good. Okay, so let's go on then to
Back to,
section 4 of the manual. If you could, we're going to give you a quick overview of this section as well. If you could turn to page 26 in your manual. So this section is about resources for professionals involved in the evaluation process.
yeah, and do know this is up to date. This is what Jessica did. These are all, the links are current, so they should work.
At least as of December 2016, so.
Yeah, December.
Yes.
About to fall out of my chair. You know what? When I look at this, what I think is how many great resources we do have. We spent some time last week or week before last with Eva Phillips and they did the Power of K. When you look at the whole evaluation system, the EESLPD units, it's the notion that we have abundance in resources and things. Whenever I looked at this, and after Jessica had gone through and updated and all like that, we found the wiki space, we found the outdoor learning environments, the tools for assessing quality practice is in early childhood and elementary. Keep turning to page 30. Have y'all got the book? I've got it. That's the guidelines. That's the one I've been trying to say near from the National Standards for Early Childhood Programs. You see where it says the policy and the benchmarks under B, National Institute, early learning. This we have met. We are one of 6 states in the nation that has met this annually, at least for the last 6 years that I know of. I don't know what this book says, but I do know that we've met it at least for 6 or 7 years, which means that those policies that are listed there, that we have those benchmarks. That's quality, y'all. That's high quality. We have it in the degrees, in the class size, in the screening, in the monitoring, the site visits, those kind of things. The other thing I wanted you to look at was on page 31. When you look at the D, policy statement on inclusion of children with disabilities in early childhood programs, that's an important thing for you to look at from the Department of Education and Human Services, and talking about access to high quality early childhood programs. So there's abundance of information in there in those resource programs.
We want to point out a couple of other, what we think are very important resources. If you're interested in thinking about what is 21st century learning, there probably is no better, for 21st century learning skills, there's really no better resource that we've found than The Mind in the Making by Ellen Galinsky. Bobby, you want to give a quick overview? The idea of this book is the 7 essential life skills that every child needs.
If you don't have this book, go out and buy it. I bought it on Amazon for $8. What this is this, according to her, the 7 essential life skills for children. And I'm telling you, they're exactly what they need. Self-control, communication, making connections, taking on challenges, being self-directed. But this is easy reading. I got this book and did parent sessions with it. Mine's underlined and written in, and it says how you can help children thrive in life and leadership. And it's really written, I think, for parents, because it's in the language that the parent can use. The other one we show everybody is getting it right from the start, and that's for the principals. And that was written by an NAYC person and a person from a principal association. Gaston County gave this to all the pre-K principals. I would think if you're working with a principal in a public school, or that the principal's guides, it says, what it does, it talks about curriculum, classroom routines. It talks about what's developmentally appropriate. It's just a really good book. And so it's by Kostelnik and Grady. And it's put out by the National Association of Elementary Principals and the National Association of Early Childhood.
And the exact reference for the book is in the manual, so if you want to get hold of it. But the basic idea here is if you're a principal or administrator that came from a background other than early childhood, and you need to give yourself a quick course in how you become an effective leader for the educators of young children in your building, there's really no better resource than this. It's wonderful for that. And it, of course, also makes the point of how important it is to get it right at the early years, how important that is to later student success. Okay, So the next thing we want to do is talk a little bit about some general principles about how the North Carolina teacher evaluation process works. First thing we want to say is it's an evaluation system, not an encouragement system. Now, earlier we had the comment that we want to be encouraging to teachers. We absolutely want to be encouraging to teachers. We want to do everything we do in the context of a real meaningful relationship with the teacher, right? But we have to remember that there is a difference between mentoring and evaluating, right? The strong, close relationship we want to be between the mentor and the teacher, and the evaluator still has to reserve some objectivity and some distance on some level, right? So it still is a performance evaluation process, although it's a process of career development. But the focus is on professional growth, not on simple compliance, right? Remember what we talked about with the TPAI before, earlier in the talk. That was really more of a compliance instrument, right? Are you at standard or not? And this is not about simple compliance. This is about going beyond compliance and developing your skills across your career. The other point we want to make, and we'll make this several times today, is that it uses what's called a holistic scoring system, not an analytical scoring system. Okay, what we're not doing is here to advocate using the rubric as some kind of checklist. And you just, assign point values to different types of behaviors you see. You look for every one of those behaviors. You either saw it or you didn't. At the end, you add up the points, and then there's some cut score established. And then we know from that analysis or that analytical scoring strategy that the teacher either met the standard or didn't meet the standard. That's not what this system is about. This system is according to what we call holistic scoring, which means that you evaluate and synthesize the totality of the evidences across all your experiences with that classroom, including not only your direct observations of the teacher's behavior, but what you see in the children's work, the artifacts that are presented to you by the teacher, and you view those holistically and then make a placement on the rubric that most fits the preponderance of the evidence that you've been able to collect. Those are very different kinds of approaches, and the holistic approach really suits this task much better. A couple of other issues with how this system is used when it's used correctly. Remember that when we make our summative ratings, those are the ratings we make at the end of the year to summarize a teacher's performance for that year. We want them to be supported by formative evidences, right? We want those summative ratings to be grounded in the whole range of evidences that we've collected throughout our formative visits. So we have earlier visits in the year that are really a type of formative assessment, and then we have a final visit that is a type of summative assessment. The ratings that are made after the summative are really rooted in all the formative evidences that we collect throughout the year. We also want to remember that this process is useful for professional development. It's useful for training, it's useful for planning, career development, and so forth, as we've been saying. It's not just a necessary hurdle. So teachers are busy, administrators are busy, they're in a high-stress occupation, they have a lot of demands, but this can't be treated as simply just one more thing to check off a list, right? If it's treated as a much more meaningful part of their professional practice, it can be really beneficial to both the children and the teachers. And lastly, on this slide, this process has an impact on child development and learning. We have to remember that as we work to improve the quality of teacher practices, that has a direct impact on what's happening for the children. But there are no quick fixes in terms of improving the quality of experiences for children. There are no magic bullets, and this certainly isn't one of them. Okay, on page 46 in the manual, we have an example of the so-called cheat sheet. What we've tried to do is create individual pages that could be photocopied. We had a lot more of them in the earlier version of the manual, but in this version we have several. I like to use this one because what this does for me as an evaluator is gives me a quick reminder of what are the standards, what are the elements. Gives me a little bit of space to make some notes about those. Also, you can see on the bottom, we have a reminder that we're not just there to look at teacher behaviors, right? Sometimes teachers think it's a little bit odd, my style as an evaluator, because I'm not watching them all the time. And they think their job is to put on a performance act for me, right? Because this is their special day. Well, we're there really to look at a variety of evidences. Evidences in student behaviors, evidences in teachers' behaviors, artifacts, and the general overall classroom conditions. Lots of times we find as evaluators that we see more about the cumulative effect of the teacher's professional practice in the children's behaviors and in their work samples and artifacts they produce than we do in the actual behaviors that we observe on that one simple snapshot, right? In other words, what we see in the snapshot is how well the teacher did that day. There could be all kinds of things influencing how the teacher did for that one, say, 20 minutes of whole group instruction that you might observe during a visit. On the other hand, if you focus a lot on classroom conditions, child behaviors, artifacts that represent student work, all those things are impacted by the cumulative effect of everything that the teacher's been doing up until that point of the visit. So anyway, this is just a simple resource. We also have pages like this in the manual for each one of the standards where we've made a little bit more detailed version for each one of the standards. So if you find those helpful, it might be useful. Okay, we're going to switch in now into section 5 called Tips for Making Ratings, or Tips for Evaluators. One thing I like to talk about every time we do these trainings is a sign we have in our center, but also Albert Einstein had this sign hanging in his office at Princeton. And the sign read, "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts," right? So the idea here is we're famous in education for making quantitative indicators of things because they're easy to report on, they're easy to track growth on, they're easy to kind of feed to policymakers and politicians as if there are simple indicators of the quality of what happens in educational practice. But there really are no simple indicators, right? It's a rich, complex, nuanced process. And so we have to remember we're there to understand the totality of the experience of what it's like to be a child in that classroom, not just the sum total of things that are easy to count. The most important task you will perform as an evaluator is to make holistic ratings on the rubric. Remember, it is all tied to the rubric. The rubric meaning, that's that 4-step scale that each one of the elements and standards has associated with them. So that's, developing, proficient, accomplished, and distinguished. So everything we do has to be tied back to and rooted to those standards and elements in that particular rubric. And the ratings are intended to be rooted in a holistic synthesis of the total evidences gathered based on our professional judgment and all of our training, and not just some simple mathematical formula or some summation of points on a checklist. This is, again, the idea of holistic scoring versus analytical scoring. Did you want to add anything to all that discussion?
No, I was just looking at that next slide. It's the notion that we're not analytically scoring is really important because you're also going to put in some professional judgment. And that was always, a scary thing for me. But you do use your background, your knowledge, and those kinds of things when you're looking at what is going to be the quantitative score. When we talk about the different levels of performance, that makes this a lot clearer to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've kind of hit this hard about the holistic scoring thing, so
Right.
there's no need to repeat these points. But one of the key things to remember is that just because this process rightfully involves professional judgment,
Right.
and is holistic and involves kind of a simultaneous analysis of all the evidences across a whole academic year, that does not mean that it's some kind of subjective process that is inherently unfair to teachers, right? Evaluators and principals and administrators can learn to do this with reliability, with fidelity, can learn to do it in a valid way that truly reflects the performance of the teacher. Because it's holistic and does not involve a lot of specific counting of behaviors, does not mean that it's not a valid process. And it does not mean that it's a completely subjective one. A good professional evaluator can make inferences from what they see and from the evidences they collect and still make accurate placements about a teacher's performance. A couple of other tips about making ratings. It's important for us to remember that teachers develop at different rates. You may work with, say, 3 new teachers in the same school, and one of them reaches proficient status in one of the standards faster than the other 2. But maybe those other two are coming to proficient on different standards faster. And all of that is okay. It's a 3-year journey that we're taking teachers on, and a lot of differences in rates of development and things like that are going to occur, and all that is normal and all that is okay. Teachers may reach proficient status earlier for some standards than others and do not have to receive the same summative rating on all of the standards, right? I worked with a teacher last year who still had one of the areas that she was not yet proficient on, but she did reach proficient in several other ones, and that's pretty much to be expected. That's kind of the way it works. Okay, and a final point about making placements on the progressions. Teachers move across performance levels on a particular element only when all the descriptors within that element are rated at the same level. Now, what do we mean by this? This is a little bit tricky, but what we mean is a teacher can move from developing to proficient on the rubric within one of the elements only when all of the behavioral anchors, so to speak, or all the types of evidences for both developing and proficient have been met. In other words, they all have to be there before we can move the teacher up on the rubric from developing to proficient. Okay, so now let's turn to the rubric itself. This is kind of the heart of the matter here. The first level on the rubric is what we call developing. And the two key phrases, or the two key words that we use to describe the developing teacher is awareness and interest. And let me just take a minute and actually read these words to you, because again, we've been very careful about some of these explanations in the manual, and this is directly from the manual. Developing teachers are generally early in their careers. However, teachers may reach proficiency for each of the standards at different rates. Teachers functioning at the developing level on a particular standard are expressing awareness and interest concerning relevant areas of professional functioning and effectiveness. Successful teachers at the developing level ask questions, think about what they do not yet know enough about, and pursue resources that can help them expand their knowledge and skills.
Yeah, I have to say, developing teachers, a sense of awareness and interest is somewhere in the teacher's realm at all times. Mm-hmm. Yeah, teachers are always having some level of performance that is developing. And other than that, they might be dead. So you got to know that. Whenever they're beginning to ask questions, think about things they don't know enough about or they need to know more things about, things to expand their knowledge. What I see is there's so many new elements out there that people can investigate that I see a lot more people on using the developing level of discovering new information and how it applies to what they're doing. So you would see this throughout a teacher's career. You would see this to somebody who's been there forever, or they should be that developing kind of thing. In your manual, I think it's on like 42 and 43 somewhere. Let's go to the next slide.
We want you to take a few minutes to think about and discuss what a developing teacher looks like in the setting that you work. Okay, so let's move on in the rubric then. To proficient. What does a proficient teacher look like? The key phrase that we use here is intentionality and consistent implementation. We expect developing teachers to do a lot of the good stuff that we expect proficient teachers to do, but we know that when we walk into a proficient teacher's classroom, we're going to see a lot more intentionality about their practice, and we're going to see consistent implementation. On any given day we go in there, we should see quality practices taking place.
And you know, that's what the state wants. They keep saying, we want all the teachers to be proficient, which means they want them to be intentional and consistent. There's nothing wrong with that. But what this really describes is that for some teachers, this might really have to be a goal, things that they would really have to work on. Mm-hmm. And they, in writing those goals or understanding them, use this definition because it says how to plan instructions, manage the classroom. It's sometimes what I discover with my teachers, if you would help them talk about classroom management, or you would help them plan about presenting a new theme or designing a new center, those kinds of things, then they would get a better understanding of what that really meant as being proficient, that they could demonstrate that they had those skills.
So let's look at the words we've used here a little bit very quickly. Proficient teachers have made it through the initial adjustment process to the teaching profession and have achieved an easily recognized level of intentionality and consistent implementation of the broad principles contained in the professional teaching standards. These teachers understand how to plan instructional activities, manage the classroom, facilitate child development, and direct child learning. All teachers are expected to reach
Right.
the proficient level across all the standards within the early stages of their career. So these are teachers who have learned how to be a teacher, learned how to reflect about practice, made the initial adjustment to the profession, and have learned how to implement the curriculum, right? So we should expect to see intentionality and consistent implementation of the curriculum in their classrooms.
And you know, the state actually says you have 3 years to gain that proficient level. So the teachers that you're evaluating may still be working on that.
Okay, so now we want you to take a minute and discuss what a proficient early childhood teacher looks like in your setting. And if you're remote, you can send some comments through the chat box. So let's look at what the manual says about accomplished teachers. So here we use the catchphrase greater depth and frequency. You know, we expect developing teachers to be making an initial adjustment to the profession, asking a lot of questions, learning about their professional role. We expect proficient teachers to be fully implementing the curriculum. We expect them to be doing a lot of the good things that we expect high-quality teachers to do. And it's where we expect most teachers to be, and in fact, on most of the standards where most teachers will spend most of their careers. But accomplished teachers are truly something different. Not only are they implementing the curriculum very consistently, and we should see consistently high-quality practices on any given day in their classroom, and they're using a lot of intentional teaching strategies, but we should see all of those things in greater depth and frequency in the accomplished teacher's classroom. So accomplished teachers demonstrate greater depth and frequency in their implementation of curricula, assessment, and pedagogical strategies. These teachers have begun to achieve a higher level of functioning on particular focal standards, have set higher PDP goals, and have begun to specialize and become known for their particular skills and abilities on specific standards. Early career teachers can visit the classroom of a teacher who has reached the accomplished level on a particular standard, and the North Carolina Birth to Kindergarten specialty standards will come to life for that visitor. And this is really the key thing for me.
Yeah, I had a teacher who was accomplished, and we had people visit her classroom just to observe how she had set things up, the way she did with story time, a variety of things like that. That became really helpful. Maybe one person just to go in there at a time to observe. It really does help to see what's going on and when somebody is in action. So this one is a good one about early career teachers visiting a classroom, of some people that you have that are accomplished.
So you can take a minute to discuss among yourselves, what do you think an accomplished teacher looks like in your setting? Now let's move on to what does a distinguished teacher look like? And here we indicate the ideas of leadership and dissemination as sort of the key features that distinguish the distinguished teacher from the accomplished teacher. So distinguished teachers regularly participate in leadership and dissemination activities in the profession. They hold leadership positions in their schools, in their school systems, in professional organizations. They develop and demonstrate model and innovative practices and may serve as mentors or model demonstration classrooms for other teachers. So for me, a distinguished teacher is someone who's produced resources that are very widely disseminated and used by other teachers, maybe produced particular lesson plans or interactive activities or modules for training or written articles or written books, all this sort of thing.
Yeah, the key word is dissemination. Yeah, because a distinguished teacher, everybody knows that teacher's name.
They have a
Everybody
wide
knows
impact.
what their specialty is, or if there is a specialty, or wants to go visit their classroom or what. So Rich said it, they demonstrate, they model innovative practices, and they model demonstration classrooms for other teachers. And like I said, we've got some data that really support the notion if you get some observations, then that way that gets into your practices. So there's some good information there.
So you can take a minute now and discuss with your colleagues what distinguished early childhood teachers look like in your setting. So now we've come to section 6, and this is really the meat of the manual. This is where we present sample teacher behaviors, child behaviors, classroom conditions, and artifacts that help illustrate the standards and elements for early childhood classrooms. In this section of the manual, we've shown brief descriptions of a variety of widely held and widely accepted early childhood teaching practices, but they're organized by the standards and elements. So for each one of the standards and elements, we have these exemplar practices. And these descriptions are designed to be used in conjunction with the evidence summary sheets in the appendix. So in other words, they give you samples that you can look for and make notes about when you visit the classroom.
And where these came from are from principals, focus groups, you, evaluations, mentors, families, teachers. All of these are things that were listed, those sample evidences. They were certainly not a checklist, but certainly looked at the examples of things that you might see, that you may see in that. And some of you, when you did your observations, you know, you would write under those things that you had seen, and some of that came from those sheets of papers that we did.
As we mentioned before, it's not all about looking just at the teacher's behavior, right? It's about looking at child behaviors, what children are doing in the classroom, how engaged they are, how excited they are about learning, how comfortable they are to be in the school setting in that classroom, and so forth. But it's also about artifacts of student learning and students demonstrating that they have, learned certain skills. As Bobby said, the samples are not intended to provide a comprehensive list of all possible indicators for a particular element. They're samples, and they're not intended to be transformed into some kind of finite list or checklist of specific behaviors to look for. This section does not replace or substitute for any part of the rubric, right? It's still all about the rubric. This is just our way of providing you a resource that translates the rubric into practical samples and examples that you might see in an early childhood classroom. So the evaluation ratings can only be made using the rubric. The sample teacher behaviors, child behaviors, classroom conditions, and artifacts are intended to just provide you support for the ratings you make on the rubric, but they're not intended to be transformed into any kind of checklist. They're really just useful for collecting evidences that support ratings. So this section is designed to help principals and administrators and teachers more fully understand how the standards and elements manifest themselves in the early childhood classroom, what they look like in real time, in real classrooms. So we believe that this section can help teachers understand and interpret their ratings better, right? Understand, well, okay, you're right, I don't do these kind of behaviors, but I do these kind of behaviors, or my children are exhibiting these kind of behaviors, but not these. So it helps them, in the sense, make the ratings come to life a little bit, and also can lend themselves to professional goals, professional development plan making, but also to topics for professional learning communities to discuss, especially when you might have a group of teachers or a group of children in the same PLC environment that all share needs for growth in the same area.
You know, this section really helps with the post-conference and the discussions about the ratings that have been assigned. That's probably the most important thing on that thing. It helps teachers understand and interpret the ratings that they've received. It's a point of discussion because even sometimes the observer in that post-conference we'll talk about the kinds of things they've received, and then if they have an understanding of this section or these standards and these behaviors, then that helps them come to some mutual understanding of really how the observer's interpreting what they see.
So if you'll turn to page 59 in the manual, we want to just quickly go through one of the sets of example evidences, just to kind of help you understand. So how the manual can be used. So this is for Standard 2. Teachers establish a respectful environment for a diverse population of students. And you can see on this page, element 2A is illustrated. Teachers provide an environment in which each child has a positive, nurturing relationship with caring adults. And then you can see how the manual is organized. We have sample evidences for developing, proficient, accomplished, and distinguished.
If you look at that page 59, you'll see these are not a checklist. The reason I keep saying that, I know y'all are tired of me saying it, but I actually had somebody tell me they couldn't find these where they were in the classroom. And I said, nobody said you should find them. These are examples of what you might see. It said, may be present. And look at that first one. Teacher uses supportive facial expressions, smiles, and body language. You know, that's something to know to look for. There's basic centers and interest centers. That's a developing teacher. Don't forget, a developing teacher has a BK license. Is supposed to know something about child development and early education. It does not say a non-informed teacher. We do not have a category for that. So do not forget that. Developing means you're moving. You're making progress. These are good examples. You could add many of your own. You probably should when you're looking at this and thinking about it to see what's with the different elements and under proficient, and particularly that one that's on page 62. Teacher displays knowledge of diverse cultures, their histories, and their roles in shaping global issues. I think that's something we should work on. When I look at these, I think we should have some workshops or some webinars or something discussing these things. I'm looking at Amanda, and Amanda's shaking her head. Every time I look at these, I think we really need to add another dimension of professional development to our to the things that we don't have time to do now.
So if you go through the mentor or evaluator training, you'll go in depth
Yes.
into all of these, right? And you'll get a clearer picture for each of the elements within each of the standards, what the 4 levels really look like. But we just wanted you to be exposed to what one of them looks like in the manual.
Right.
And there's a lot of meat there that you can spend a lot of time on. Our intention for today is to introduce you to the resource, but not to train you as an evaluator. And certainly before you do your first evaluations or first visits as a mentor, we want you to really be familiar with all the standards and really get a fairly clear understanding of what each one of the elements looks like at the different levels on the rubric. Okay, so now we also want to point out some other helpful resources if you'd go to page 104 in the manual. So what we have here are a couple different forms of cheat sheets as we illustrated before. We gave you an example of one. We've got similar
chart.
kinds of simple page overviews that you can use as note-taking guides, if you will,
Right.
when you're in the classroom. You
Yeah.
could photocopy those. We also have, so we call those the evidences summary pages.
Right.
We have one of those for each one of the standards. We
Also got a
also
glossary.
have a glossary where we go through and define a lot of the terms that you'll find in the manual, because a lot of the terms within our little world in this work are used in very specific ways. So it might be useful as you're reading the manual, becoming familiar with it, to realize the glossary's there and go back and refer to it as needed. We also have a couple of other resources. We have some sample questions for doing a pre-conference
And the post.
and for doing the post-conference. Those are at the end of that section. We've also included the North Carolina Professional Teaching Standards for you.
That's right.
It's really important to become familiar with those because that's the standard against which we're judging the quality of a teacher's performance in their work in the classroom.
And we have one more thing. We have the BK teaching candidate license standards.
Okay,
So we have on the end of that, the actual standards people met to become the BK license, in case you've forgotten that. Because it really does say that our teachers are well qualified if they got that BK license. So, and then it's got on page 131, the organizational structure of EESLPD of our unit, and shows how we, as a LEA.
so let's summarize then all of what we've done. And I want to use kind of a creative analogy to do that, to kind of bring it together of what we've done so far today. So evaluating, supporting, and developing high-quality early childhood teachers requires a long-term perspective, right? This is a process that teachers are going to be involved with from the very beginning of their career through the end of their career. it's really much more like carefully crafting and aging fine wine than it is like mixing Kool-Aid, right? We mentioned before, there are no quick fixes in early childhood education. There's no way to instantly produce out of a college of education a highly qualified, distinguished teacher. We do the best we can, but professional development and learning to be a high-quality teacher is an ongoing process. So I've used this idea of making fine wine. Well, let's talk about what makes fine wine. Well, there's several important steps. These are just a few of them. But let's remember it begins with selecting the grapes in the first place. Then it requires you to nurture the vines year after year. You have to respond to changing weather and soil conditions, and you have to blend complementary varieties. Now, hopefully you've seen how I'm using this analogy, right? Because what is selecting the grapes about? Well, is everyone well-suited to be a teacher? Probably not. And even among those who are really called and are passionate about being educators, is everyone a good match for working with young children? And the answer is no, right? Sometimes the most important work we're going to do as mentors and evaluators is not urging people to exit the profession, but urging them to find the right level of student that fits for their skills and abilities as a teacher. I know myself, I work best with adults. I tend to work in these elaborate analogies and very abstract communication and complex and fast-paced communication, and I like students to construct their own meaning. Well, that doesn't fit so much with 3s and 4s, but that might fit really well with doctoral students, for example. So some of the experiences I've had some very good teachers that I encourage to maybe think about first grade or second grade, because maybe teaching 3s and 4s wasn't the best thing for them. So there's a lot of ways that this idea of selecting the right grapes comes into play. And we want the right people to teach young children. We want them to be passionate about working with young children, and we want them to be skilled in how we develop and nurture the growth and development of young children. But we have to nurture the vines year after year, right? It's a challenging and stressful profession to work as a teacher. You require constant kind of, refueling, learning of coping strategies, learning how to deal with the challenges of the profession. And there's always new things to learn, right? There's always new teaching strategies being developed or new things we're learning about cognitive development of children or language development of children and so forth. And then we all have to learn how to respond to changing weather and soil conditions, and we have to help the teachers we work with do the same thing, right? So there's constantly shifting political sands. There's all kinds of issues related to the funding of early childhood or expectations, new curriculum models, new assessment strategies, new requirements being placed on teachers. And the demographics of the children are changing too, right? Like the funding model for programs can change, the demographics of the neighborhood and the families that the children come from can be changing. Teachers are constantly dealing with challenging and changing conditions. And part of our job is to encourage them to adapt and to learn coping strategies, to learn new skills that help them adapt to the changing conditions that are simply the reality of the American classroom. And then blending complementary varieties, it's very important to get teachers plugged into a team that works well for them, right? And that comes in many varieties, right? One way to think about the team aspect is, are they paired with an assistant that they work very well with? I've seen, and I'm sure we all have, situations where an individual teacher and individual assistant teacher are very high quality people, but they may not complement each other in the optimal way, right? So sometimes we can intervene or make suggestions about how that kind of issue can be dealt with. But also, every PLC isn't created equal, and every PLC or grade level planning team, if you will, doesn't work in its optimal way. And sometimes teachers can find their complementary partners that they can help plan with and help process all the challenges of teaching with. So this is one of my favorite places in Northern California. This is Benziger in Sonoma. And here, they enrich the soil by taking all of the byproducts of the winemaking process, all the pruning from the vines when they're fixed up at the end of the season, all the skins and seeds and all that sort of thing, get composted and get put back in the soil. And that's one of the things we have to think about is our role as mentors and evaluators. We're there to enrich the working conditions for the teachers. Another thing they do at Benziger is they plant food plots. They use no pesticides. Everything is organic there. And if you've ever tasted their wine, you know it has a little bit of a brighter and fruitier taste because it doesn't have any of the kind of artificial fertilizers or pesticides or preservatives used in the process. But how they accomplish that is they preserve a portion of the vineyard to be set aside for food plots to attract back the natural flora and fauna to the area, and that puts the entire environment or the ecosystem back in equilibrium. So pesticides are simply not needed. Take one place who's trying to maximize every square foot of vineyard space to grow more grapes, and yet they have to use fertilizers and pesticides, and another place that realizes that if I set aside 5% of the land and plant food plots that will attract back all the natural birds and insects, I no longer have a pesticide problem. And furthermore, if I compost all the byproducts of the process, put them back into the soil, I don't have a fertilizer issue. So now how does that relate to working with teachers? Well, we have to honestly ask ourselves, do we give teachers the resources they need to grow and develop as professionals? Do we set aside part of their time and part of the resources that go into the overall expenses of the school to invest in the resources that the teachers are, right? So do we set aside time in their schedule for planning, for growth, for professional development, and for reflection about their practice? So hopefully this has been helpful to you. We just, again, had the goal for today of introducing you to the manual as a resource to help you in your work as a mentor and evaluator or as an administrator. There are follow-up trainings. You can go through a whole training, a several-day training on being an evaluator. You can go through a several-day training on being a mentor. And as time goes on, please keep checking back with our site because we plan to develop further professional development modules as well. We've listed here our emails if you want, email addresses if you want to get in contact with us. This link here can be used to download the manual from the state's website. So this link here can be used to download the manual from the EESLPD site, and then this is the link to our technical report series on our center's website, and you can also download a black and white or a color version of the manual there. So any final comments, Bobby?
No, but do know that this manual has really reflected the feedback that we got from the principals and the teachers and the mentors and the evaluators of the things that we learned from the time we developed the first one till we did the revision. It's better than it was. I see it always as some document that as we learn new things, as we accomplish new things, that we begin to think, okay, let's go in this work. I see this as a working document, things that we could add addendums to or even send out, attach this to your resource manual, because we never meant for it to be something that just stayed in place. We wanted it to reflect our growth and development. It does. It reflects the things we learned in the last 10 years. Right. Or since 2007. 10 years. Oh, gosh.
Yeah, it is.
10 years. Heaven help us. So good girls. Yeah, good people.
All right.
I'm looking at Kyle. Kyle, you did good today, honey. Where is Melinda? Is she gone?
No,
She's still there?
She's still there.
Yeah, she may have to.
Melinda's right here.
So we will see you again.
Yeah,
Anything else?
I'm right here.
You guys have minutes.
Johnny said.
Well, I was going to make one more concluding comment, do you think? Just
There's
I don't know what
Melinda.
to
Hey,
say,
Melinda.
but something that
Hey.
more positive to. Okay, so thanks again for attending the training today. We look forward to interacting with you in the future. Please contact us in our center if we can be a further support to you. And again, keep visiting our center site. We're going to continue to add professional development materials to our ongoing set of resources for evaluators.